The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that our old systems are not fit anymore for the 21st century. It has laid bare the fundamental lack of social cohesion, fairness, inclusion, and equality. Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight the virus, but to shape the system for the need for the post-corona era.
Most people think the world is run by presidents, prime ministers, or parliament. But the real power, the place where global policy is written, long before it ever reaches your ballot, isn't in Washington, Brussels, or Beijing. It's in a private ski resort in Switzerland, the World Economic Forum, an unelected organization with no accountability. Yet it shapes the global economy, rewrites government policy, and directs trillion-dollar corporations like pieces on a chessboard. Every January, private jets flood into Davos. The heads of central banks, presidents and prime ministers, tech billionaires, and the most powerful NGOs on Earth all gather behind closed doors to coordinate everything. And the most disturbing part, none of this was ever voted on. Yet somehow, it governs the people who govern the world. And at the center of it all, the architect of this global business cartel is one man, Klaus Schwab. The soft-spoken engineer who built the World Economic Forum from nothing into the most influential organization on the planet. So how exactly did the WEF gain the power to influence governments that rule us all? And why are the richest corporations on Earth following directives from a non-profit in Switzerland? And how did one man rise from total obscurity to become the unelected architect of a global system that affects your money, your privacy, and your freedom? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
Klaus Schwab was born in 1938 in Ravensburg, Germany, the son of Eugene Schwab, the managing director of a powerful machine-building company called Escher Wyss. Ravensburg was unusual during World War II. It was one of the few German industrial towns the Allies saw no strategic reason to burn it down. And Escher Wyss was one of those factories foolishly left untouched. Under Eugene Schwab, Escher Wyss manufactured turbines, industrial equipment, and precision parts used throughout the German war machine. Historical archives show that the Ravensburg plant was used by the regime to support wartime production. It relied on forced labor brought in from concentration camp networks and supplied advanced turbine technology considered vital to the Nazi infrastructure. Klaus Schwab was a young child while this was happening, far too young to be involved. But while most kids grow up around toys, Klaus grew up around engineers, industrialists, and power structures. And that mattered. After the war, Schwab studied mechanical engineering, then economics, then public policy. He was studying systems, how industries work, how governments coordinate, and how influence travels through the layers of society. In the 1960s, he worked at Sulzer Escher Wyss, helping oversee a nuclear policy program tied to South Africa's apartheid government. By the late 1960s, one thing became clear. Klaus Schwab didn't want to run a company. He wanted to run the people who ran the companies. And in 1971, he launched an idea nobody had attempted before: a private forum where world leaders and CEOs could meet in secret, off camera, without journalists or national laws getting in the way. He called it the European Management Forum. Schwab already understood something the rest of the world didn't. If you bring the most powerful people on Earth into the same room, you don't need a country to rule the world. You only need a conference. And Schwab was the man running it. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the forum expanded beyond Europe. American corporations joined. Asian corporations followed. Soon, heads of state began showing up. By the 1990s, Schwab renamed it the World Economic Forum, a title that sounded official. And that's when the shift happened. What started as a business conference quietly transformed into a policy engine. WEF papers and discussions began influencing global regulations on trade, climate, banking, technology, supply chains, public health, and energy. Governments soon adopted WEF language, word for word, in their own policy drafts. Corporations echoed the same talking points across industries, and Schwab realized something nobody else had. The forum had become more powerful than most parliaments. And that's when Schwab moved to expand his reach even further. He launched new programs designed to shape not just current leaders, but future ones. He pioneered global think tanks, public-private initiatives, climate councils, digital governance boards, and economic task forces. These bodies had no constitutional authority, but their recommendations became global standards anyway. By the early 2000s, one thing had become undeniable. The World Economic Forum was no longer a conference. It was a meeting place of a global business cartel, an alliance of corporations and political elites that could set the direction of entire nations. But the World Economic Forum doesn't write laws. It writes the ideas that become laws. Every January in Davos, they release frameworks that corporations adopt first and governments enforce later. And while the language sounds harmless, sustainability, equity, and stakeholder capitalism, the real impact shows up in the life of the average American, long before anyone realizes where the policy came from. But here's how those ideas reach your front door. WEF trade papers promote borderless supply chains and international harmonization. That means manufacturing drifts overseas to places with cheaper labor and fewer regulations. American factories close down, town economies collapse, and generations of skilled workers vanish. Every time an American plant shut down and reopened in China or Mexico, it wasn't random. It was the result of a global ideology that puts efficiency over national stability and corporations over workers. The WEF climate frameworks push strict emission targets and ESG scoring. When corporations follow those metrics, the cost gets passed down as higher electricity bills, higher gas prices, and bans on certain vehicles and appliances. Forced compliance with green standards. For the elites in Davos, it's policy. For the average American, it's a monthly bill they can't escape. Next, WEF banking proposals influence global regulators and major investment firms. Their ideas push banks towards digital ID and environmental, social, and governance risk scoring, a scoring system used by banks, investors, and corporations to measure how aligned a company is with certain climate, social, and political objectives. Companies with low ESG scores can lose investments, loans, contracts, or access to global markets. And because it originated from institutions like the WEF, it becomes a tool for enforcing ideology through corporations instead of governments. The result is a soft version of economic punishment. Businesses can lose credit. Ordinary people can be denied services. Not because of law, but because of guidelines. The banks followed to look aligned. Tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are WEF strategic partners. They work directly with the forum to create governance models for online content and data. This leads to uniform censorship policies, centralized data collection, and algorithms that suppress certain viewpoints. Americans experience it as a sudden, synchronized tightening of online speech. It feels coordinated because it is. And years before global supply chains collapsed, the WEF promoted just-in-time logistics and global distribution networks. Corporations adopted the model because it was cheap and efficient, but when the system broke, shelves emptied, medications ran short, car prices exploded, groceries spiked, baby formula vanished, and inflation surged. The everyday American paid the price for a system optimized for corporate margins, not national resilience. Also, the WEF had spent years promoting coordinated global pandemic responses before 2020. Their recommendations emphasized synchronized restrictions, public-private health mandates, digital health tracking, and centralized authority during emergencies. When the crisis hit, the response in dozens of those countries looked identical. Small businesses suffered, big corporations flourished. It wasn't coincidence, it was a blueprint. WEF energy strategies push rapid transitions from traditional energy to centralized, renewable grids. The shift pushed faster than infrastructure could handle, and it led to higher utility bills, unstable grids, and restrictions on fossil fuel production. When energy becomes unreliable or artificially restricted, every item in the economy gets more expensive. The guy in Nebraska or Ohio feels it long before Davos ever does.
Insects are becoming a trend. The Western diet has to kind of shift and change. And most importantly, it's natural, it's normal, and it's the way that we have to feed the future. We're facing big global challenges. People don't believe that they can make a change, but you really, really can, because you making a change is the only change you can really make. When it times it by 9 billion people, it makes a fundamental difference to the way that we live on this planet.
The WEF published multiple proposals promoting insect protein as a sustainable replacement for beef. Governments and NGOs soon echoed the idea. This is why Americans have heard phrases like "eat bugs" and "reduce meat consumption" from official organizations. It didn't come from citizens, it came from the institutions aligned with the same agenda. Meanwhile, small farmers face tighter regulations, while large alternative protein companies receive incentives. For the average American, that means fewer choices and higher prices for traditional food. In 1992, Schwab created one of the most quietly influential programs in modern history, the Global Leaders for Tomorrow Initiative. In 2004, it evolved into something more aggressive and far more ambitious, the Young Global Leaders Program, YGL. The WEF began handpicking hundreds of promising rising stars, politicians, tech founders, activists, training them to think the same way, speak the same language, and push the same coordinated policies. The results were staggering. The list of YGL alumni reads like a global power map. They include Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, Mark Zuckerberg, Gavin Newsom, Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos as inner circle partners, dozens of national-level ministers and central bank officials, and influential NGOs and UN leaders. They were the people the WEF identified early, the ones they believed would help shape the future. And they did. When crisis struck, economic, public health, or environmental, these leaders responded in almost identical ways, using almost identical language, rooted in an almost identical policy framework. That wasn't coincidence. That was training. Schwab himself openly bragged about his influence when he said, "We penetrate the cabinets." He wasn't exaggerating. These individuals were not simply graduates. They were the assets of the worldview, a belief system of global governance, corporate partnership, international alignment, and managed populations.
The World Economic Forum has confirmed they're investigating former chairman Klaus Schwab after his seemingly abrupt resignation on Monday.
An anonymous whistleblower sent a letter to the organization and accused Schwab of misusing forum funds and resources. The Wall Street Journal first reported the news.
The letter also criticized the forum's workplace culture and governance. The journal writes it included allegations that Klaus Schwab asked junior employees to withdraw thousands of dollars from ATMs on his behalf and used forum funds to pay for private in-room massages at hotels. It's always massages at hotels. This alleges that his wife, Hilda, a former forum employee, scheduled token forum-funded meetings in order to justify luxury holiday travel at the organization's expense.
For years, the WEF operated like a flawless machine, synchronized, polished, carefully controlled. But behind the sleek panels and the smiling photo ops, insiders began to whisper about a very different environment. WEF staff, former employees, and political attendees quietly spoke of a culture built around secrecy, elitism, and a level of personal indulgence far removed from the global responsibility preached from the stage. Over time, a shadow formed around Klaus Schwab. For years, European diplomats and Davos regulars traded rumors about Schwab's behavior, stories involving elite wellness sessions, inappropriate conduct with massage workers, and questionable interactions during the private after-hours side of Davos that never made the news. Nothing was printed in official reports. Nothing was pursued publicly. But the stories floated around European political class for decades, always tied to the same man at the center of the forum. Inside the WEF itself, staff began raising concerns about how money flowed through the organization. Anonymous employees described extravagant spending, misallocation of donor funds, and money disappearing to initiatives no one could trace. As Schwab aged into his 80s, a new generation inside the WEF began pushing for change. They accused him of treating the organization like personal property, a monarchy disguised as a nonprofit. They complained that the forum was becoming stagnant under his grip. There were reports of shouting matches behind closed doors, clashing egos, and factions forming between the old guard loyalists and the younger technocrats. And then came the revolt. By 2023-2024, the internal frustrations couldn't be contained. Major donors demanded new leadership. Corporate partners whispered about a fresh vision. Board members privately urged Schwab to retire. Several WEF executives resigned abruptly. Internal documents hinted at mismanagement. Whistleblowers contacted journalists anonymously. The board prepared succession plans without Schwab's involvement. For the first time in over half a century, the founder was no longer in control. His own people that he had trained, elevated, and guided finally forced the issue. Schwab's empire had grown so large that it began to turn against its architect. And as the revolt spread through the halls of Davos, it became clear that the man who shaped the WEF could no longer lead it. Klaus Schwab officially announced his resignation from the World Economic Forum in May of 2024, stepping down after more than 53 years of running the most powerful, unelected organization on the planet. But the moment he walked off stage, something unexpected happened, not within Davos, but outside of it. The elites continued pushing the same policies, the same global agendas, but the world stopped nodding along. People began to recognize the pattern. Voters, who never cared about politics, started paying attention. Families who once trusted institutions now questioned every message. And the quiet shift that the global elites hoped no one would notice turned into a global awakening. Across the West, populist movements surged, not because of rage, but because the people finally saw how much control had been taken from them. Outsider politicians like Donald Trump, independent podcasters like Joe Rogan, online journalists, and creators with no corporate backing suddenly had more influence than legacy media. Decentralized voices broke the monopoly on information. Governments that once echoed Davos word for word began rejecting its policies. ESG collapsed under public pressure. Censorship regimes buckled as platforms revolted. And the world discovered something the WEF never planned for. Once people see who's been pulling the strings, they stop letting the strings control them. Schwab may be gone, but so is the era of blind obedience, I hope. And the elites are learning the hard way that the public they try to manage is finally waking up. Let us know your thoughts about the WEF in the comments below.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any comments or show ideas, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.